Hello and welcome to the fourth day of our devotions, otherwise known as Thursday for those of us that are tracking Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But however you're slicing it, however you're approaching it, I will say welcome. I'm glad that you're here and would say that it's most helpful to go back and start with Monday, because very often these particular devotionals are built one upon the other. And so they're not modular, meaning that you can go to any day and then go back and catch another day. And it makes sense to some extent. They're an explanation of a passage, and one precept builds upon the other. So I would encourage you, if you're catching this for the first time, that you'd go back to Monday and then work through, and I try to label them DEVO 1, DEVO 2. That's not because that was my favorite punk rock group of the 80s. Not at all. I wasn't even a punk rocker, but because of it's short for devotional. So we're going through a devotional on Jeremiah chapter 4, and this fits into a bigger picture, which is called the return. We've looked at, not necessarily chronologically, but the way it fits in, we can look at in time the personal return of David, a man who cooled in his openness to God and allowed hardness to persist in his heart, and then sin to break out, which affected him and his family for generations. But there's a great recovery that comes in the life of David. We then find Solomon warning the people of Israel about what the future held and the very real possibility of them in following their own nature, departing from the living God, and what it would be required in order for them to come back. That was in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14, as we moved through several verses there. And now today we're in Jeremiah chapter 4, which is situated at the end of all the kings of Israel and Judah, and it's when they are poised on the edge of going into exile. And so Jeremiah is talking to them in a last-ditch effort to get them, to plead with them and pull upon them to return. And so he's talking about the return. So we want to go ahead and jump in. Jeremiah chapter 4, verses number 1 through 4. And take this particular verse. Then the nations will be blessed by him, and in him they will glory. Now, there's some history that's lurking behind this. Jeremiah is speaking this to the people of Israel and of Judah, of the southern kingdom and Jerusalem, the leadership of the people. And one thing that they were very literate about is their history. The Exodus from Egypt, 40 years wandering in the wilderness. They were constantly hearing these themes being revisited upon them by the priests, by the prophets in the synagogue. They were constantly hearing this idea that they were God's people. We would hear later Peter pick up on this idea, and as he speaks to them, you can find this, I believe, in his first letter. And interestingly enough, Peter writes his first letter to the Jews that are scattered in the diaspora. He writes his second epistle to those who are Gentiles who have come into faith, which was begun in Judaism and completed in Yeshua HaMashiach. And so there is this idea that if we're not careful, the Israelites lost connection with very quickly, and we lose connection with today as believers. And that is that God's original intention, we know his original intention was that Adam not fall and that he walk right with before the Lord. We know that there were things developed separately from that. Then we have this idea that God has called Israel out of Egypt, rescued them, defeated all of the gods of Egypt, so to speak. And then what is he doing? He's bringing them to a mountain in Saudi Arabia. He brings them out in the wilderness. He talks about this in the 25th chapter of the book of Ezekiel. He talks about it in the other prophets. The other prophets bring this up. This is a constant theme amongst the prophets as they're speaking to the people And they talk about God's original intent, that they all, every one of them, all of them, would be a royal priesthood and a holy nation. That they would all respond positively towards their calling to be an influence and an effect upon the nations, the Gentiles, the Goyim, the ethnos, the groups of people that are not descendants of Abraham, not the descendants of Isaac, not the descendants of Jacob, but they are of Shem, not Shem, Ham and Japheth, and the other nations which are from Shem, but not from Eber, not from Abram, not from Isaac, not from Jacob. And so you have really basically two people on the earth. You have the Jew, which is shorthand for the Israelite, or you have the non-Israelite. And so God's plan was to take this nation as his own and to be his own people and to lead them and direct them into becoming a nation of priests, not just one tribe called Levi or Levi, but that all of the nation would become priests, representatives of God, that they all as a nation, every one of them, every tribe, would then become instrumental in affecting the 70 or 72 other nations upon the earth, or the other 71 or 69, depending on how you count the nations. So, that's where they find themselves. It's the idea that they are the ones who are called to be influencers in every nation of the earth, teaching them and showing them things about God. And so the hope here is that if you can get Israel, if you can get your act together, then the nations will be positioned to be blessed by him. And then the nations in him will find their glory. Do you remember the words of Simeon, who says of Yeshua, Jesus, as a little child, when he's presented at the temple? He was circumcised on the 8th day. On the 33rd day, he was presented at the temple with an offering of 2 turtle doves by his mother and father, Mary and Joseph, in that order. I'm just not in order of supremacy, but in the order of which I just named them. And he says, "Now your servant may go in peace, for my eyes have seen the light of the Gentiles and the glory of your people, Israel." So here is the hope that is in the heart of the prophet. Here is the hope that's in the heart of Jeremiah. Here is the hope that is in the heart of the Father. That if you will get these things straight, if you will return to me as a nation, if you will return to me as a people called by my name. Now we can generalize that a little bit and say amongst the church, those that are believers in Jesus Christ, he's saying if you'll return to me as a group, if you'll get your act together and get realigned like you need to be and shoulder your responsibility and reflect what it is you're called to do, then the nations will be blessed by God. And in God, they will glory. That's what it's all about. It's that hope. It's that sense that if we get it together, others can then be blessed by God and come into relationship with him and glory in him. So let that be our meditation today on this Thursday. It's more than just us in this equation. We have a responsibility to represent well. And even for somebody who might be a son of Abraham, a son of Israel, someone who we would refer to as Jewish, that there is a high and great calling upon your life, that you would find yourself in alignment with God, with Yahweh, through Yeshua HaMashiach, and then you become a very capable and able and anointed go-between someone who can represent him well before the nations, and someone who can lead the Goyim and the other nations into a relationship and encounter with Yahweh, the Lord, the God of Israel. So on this Thursday, let our meditation be upon that. It's about bringing others into the blessing and bringing others into the light of His glory. The Lord bless you. Have a great day thinking about that. Hope to see you tomorrow.